But before going to describe the poem, before going to identify or maybe analyze the particular poem, let us begin with the basic details that have been included in this edition. It is on Arun Kolatkar. Let us read this particular section first. Now, Arun Kolatkar was born, as it has been written here, you see, in Kolhapur in 1932, and he matriculated from Bombay University. He lives in Bombay, where he freelances as a visualizer. His works include Jejuri, and awarded the Commonwealth Poetry Prize in 1976-77, and Arun Kolatkaracharya, a Kavita. So it is 1976, a volume of his poems in Marathi, which was given the H.S. Gokhale Award in 1977. Jejuri is very famous, you see. Jejuri has been translated into German by Bendini. It was published in 1984. And he has contributed to Kavi, Opinion, Literary Quarterly, an anthology of Marathi poetry, okay, New Writing in India, and The Shale and the Rain, etc. As our primary concern is vested on the poems that are taken from Jejuri, you know, a poem with 31 sections. Here, there is a short entry about Jejuri. Let us read this particular section. It has been pointed out that the Jejuri is a long poem, you see. So therefore, you will find the two poems that we have selected in your syllabus. These are two parts of one particular long poem, that is Jejuri. What has been pointed out here, that Jejuri is a long poem in 31 sections, of which 5 are included here. Apparently, it is about the poet's irreverent odyssey. It's a kind of a journey to the temple of Khandava at Jejuri. Now, what happens, you know, that this Khandava is a particular reference is being associated with the god Shiva or Lord Shiva. You see, and Jejuri, this is a town which is 50 kilometers southeast from Pune. Okay, and it is sacred to Khandava, that is an incarnation of Shiva, that is Lord Shiva. So that's why here we'll find that somehow the particular poems, or whether it is considered to be the individual poems, or maybe the poems that are merely the sections of a larger one, that is the Jejuri. Now, all these are to some extent the poet's experience that he had experienced during his long time journey. Here it has been stated that it is about the poet's irreverent odyssey to the temple of Khandava at Jejuri, and it's a small town in western Maharashtra. In reality, however, the poem oscillates between faith and skepticism. That is very significant, and when I will discuss the particular poem, the verse, systematically, you will identify that these basic formations of faith and doubt, and faith and skepticism, and somehow the basic orientations of the people who belonged to the Dhangar caste or Dhangar category, and what actually happened there, how the poet was actually discriminating himself from that clan or from that group, from that racial clan and so. And somehow what is happening there, how this particular faith and skepticism is in work. So all this will be discussed in detail while we're going through the poem, the verse. So it has been stated that in reality, however, the poem oscillates between faith and skepticism in a tradition that has run its course. Kolatkar expresses that he sees with the eye of a competent reporter in a language that is colloquial and spare. So generally, whenever we will go through the text, go through the lines and so, you will find certainly that the language that Arun Kolatkar is using here, the language is very much colloquial, it is very simple, and behind that apparent simplicity, you will find that he is actually addressing to something very much problematic. Because, in a particular society where religion plays a very big role, And ultimately, when you will find you are in front of a particular society where the people are completely blind so far as the religiostic perspectives are concerned. So therefore, the basic ideologies between faith and skepticism, faith and doubt, and when the poet is trying to change to some extent to the dimension of these personalities, all these are very much significant, and at the same time, these are very much crucial to discuss. Okay, so but ultimately, whenever we will discuss this particular poem, we will get that what Kolatkar is referring to. Kolatkar expresses what he sees with the eye of a competent reporter in a language that is colloquial and spare. The result is a poem of unexpected beauty and power. So there is the kind of short note or short introduction that has been provided here. So let us go with the particular poem that is the bus. Okay, it is our first assignment, and then we'll discuss about an old woman. That is the second part of this particular poem. Now, it is the bus, and as I mentioned, that this poem is taken from Jejuri, and here you will find that a particular word note has been incorporated. It has been pointed out that it's a town 50 kilometers southeast of Pune, as I mentioned just now, and it is sacred to Khandava tract of Khandava, you know, and it's an incarnation of Lord Shiva. Okay, in the local tongue, this particular reference to Lord Shiva has been referred as Malhari Martand. Okay, probably you have heard of the name Martanda Puran. Okay, so that is Malhari Martand. I repeat, Malhari Martand. So Malhari Martand. So generally you can identify that is in this particular poem, that is the verse, somehow, you know, Arun Kolatkar is reciprocating, he's describing a kind of a journey. Okay, as it's been pointed out that Jejuri is a particular place which is 50 kilometers southeast of Pune, and that is sacred to Lord Shiva or Malhari Martand. Somehow what happens, you know, that in that particular place, it's a kind of a pilgrimage, and here you will find that the people from the villages who are belonging to the clan or maybe the caste of Dhangar, Dhangar, the people are completely blind to their religions, and ultimately their faith led them to do anything for their religious outpourings and so on. But fundamentally, as I have already discussed, as I have already pointed out, that so far as the poet is concerned, so far as the speaker of this poem is concerned, the speaker is essentially thinking in terms of a reporter, as if, so therefore you will find that just like a reporter, he is providing a kind of an ample description of what he had experienced in this particular journey. As I've already mentioned, that Jejuri is a pilgrimage, and therefore all the sections that are included in Jejuri, these are nothing but a kind of experience or different kinds of experiences that the poet actually gathered, okay, in this particular journey or in this particular pilgrimage. Now, what happens, you know, that fundamentally you will find that when somebody is a, you know, there is a kind of a difference, you see, that the difference between a tour and a pilgrimage. You can identify that whenever it's the matter with a tour, when a person is committing a tour, when a person is committing a journey, okay, the fundamental focus of this particular journey or tour lies in the particular fact that they are always trying to gather some experiences from that. When you are engaged in a tour, a long tour, you see, a study tour or maybe any particular, you know, the kind of tour that can provide you some basic impressions about some positive temperament that is needed in a typical life or human life in general. So you will find that whenever a person is being associated with such kind of tour or journey, whether it is educational, whether it is social, so fundamentally you will find that with this particular reference to the tour, you will gather some information, you will gather some, you know, something that can provide you some knowledge, obviously. But as opposed to that, if you think in terms of a person who is, you know, being engaged in such a kind of a pilgrimage, then the primary focus of this man, or maybe the group of personages who are the pilgrims, the primary focus is not simply to gather the experience, rather you are trying to attain something, okay? And certainly, when you are being engaged in a particular kind of pilgrimage, your primary focus is to devote your own thoughts and own faith and own life uh, at the altar of God, certainly. So therefore, the difference is there, and ultimately you will identify that what the speaker considers himself as a reporter. So just like a reporter-like professional like him, that he was trying to capture each and every detail that he had experienced in this particular kind of a journey. And that all the different kinds of sections that are taken here, these are forming the main structure of Jejuri. Therefore, these are somehow you will find just like a, to some extent, just like a, the basic impression that the poet actually gathered in this particular journey. These have been pointed out under the title of different kinds of subsections or names. So the bus is one of them, right? So what I was trying to suggest that the basic focus of these two kinds of journey, one is related to the poet, or maybe the person who is too much professional in committing the journey because he is engaging in the reporter-like status is being provided to him, and he's trying to report that particular experience. And another is the reference to the pilgrims or the pilgrimages, where the person is completely being, hypnotized by the typical conformations of faith and the typical form of faith in God, and the typical religious orientations are always leading these persons into, sacrificing everything from their life. So that is very significant, you see. So fundamentally, you will find that in a different orientation, in a different way of representing something, Arun Kolatkar is pointing to in this particular poem. As it has been pointed out that somehow they are committing the journey, though the focus is something different, as I mentioned just now, but ultimately the bus is very significant. Why? Because the bus is actually going to reach the destination, and ultimately this is the vehicle with the help of which the poet and at the same time the other passengers who are present there, who are belonging to Dhangar caste or Dhangar religion or Dhangar subsections of our clan or something, and they are just trying to attain the Malhari Martand and his blessings and so on. Another thing that I must suggest here, that the fundamental focus, another focus of this particular poem is the faith versus faithlessness. As I just mentioned, that the orientations are quite different, tour versus, you see, that pilgrimage. So therefore, if you think in terms of the faith, whether it is the blind faith or whether it is there is any particular form of justification behind this particular faith, I am not stating about them. But rather you will find that somehow when a person like Arun Kolatkar, who is considering himself as a reporter, and he is trying to capture each and every kind of a detail that is being captured by a reporter in general, to some extent, in the basic orientation, you will find that one person or maybe the group of personages, the representatives of the Dhangar religion, the Dhangar subsections, ultimately they have the faith, and if you think in terms of the skepticism, you will find the poet like Arun Kolatkar, or maybe the self of the speaker of this particular poem. He is belonging to the particular category, he is belonging to the particular group of people who didn't have so much faith in him. And at the same time, you will find the faithlessness and the matter of sheer skepticism is always being present. So generally, in this particular poem, you will find that apparently it is a kind of a descriptive poem because it actually encapsulates each and every kind of details of a journey that have been committed by the poet, and at the same time, there are the presences of the other passengers or co-passengers in this particular bus and what they have experienced in the formation of the journey. But at the same time, symbolically, you will identify that somehow there is a kind of a try, okay, from the perspective of the speaker or poet speaker, and he's always trying to change the temperament of these people, whether the kind of, the typical formation of faith that is obviously blind and obviously is unscientific to the poet like Arun Kolatkar. And he's trying to change the temperament of these people, but somehow it was beyond his reach, you see. And ultimately, he was completely a failure in changing the temperament of these people. So generally what you can identify that this particular failure in changing the mind, in changing the temperament of the other passengers who are present there, the other pilgrims who are present there within this bus, has been pointed, but not in a very straightforward manner. Rather, you will find that in this particular poem, that particular reference to failure has been pointed out by the poet, or maybe the poet speaker or the poet persona, to justify that somehow in a symbolic way. Okay, so it is one of the chief focuses of this particular poem. Another thing that I must add here, you see that the reporter-like temperament was present within this particular poet, that's Arun. And at the same time, you will find that Arun was very much associated with photography, okay, or maybe something cinematographic. And ultimately, what happens, that the photographic orientation is always being in work. So therefore, you will find, I will come to that particular thing while discuss, the particular poem and analyzing the poem, that the whole image that have been created throughout the poem, it is actually indicating towards this photographic orientation, just like a box camera you see, that what actually happens there. You will find that the poem actually begins in this particular fashion, that the bus is moving and the shutters or maybe the windows are completely broken, and somehow that it's too much cold outside, and that's why the bus has been covered with the tarpaulin sheet. Okay, tripol, jeta bola hoy in Bengali. So the tarpaulin sheet was being placed there, and it actually covered the bus, whole bus, and the bus is moving. The people are remaining inherent or within. So in that particular process, a kind of a picture will be taken. I will come to that later while I will discuss about the whole poem in general. So let us begin the poem then. As I mentioned, it is a bus, so it is referring to the kind of a journey on the road, obviously. And whenever there is a particular poem of journey, we identify that the journey is not simply a journey, rather it actually focuses on a journey from a different kind of angle, or different kinds of orientations, a journey of life to specific. So as I mentioned just now, it's a kind of a descriptive poem in the literal point of view, and ultimately we'll find some symbolic orientations are always in work. Okay, so let us go with the poem. The tarpaulin flaps are buttoned down on the windows, okay, of the state transport bus all the way up to Jejuri. So ultimately, at the very beginning, at this very onset of this particular poem, you will find that somehow one particular reference has been taken, one particular information has been provided, that the bus is bound to Jejuri. And therefore, it's a kind of a state transport bus, and literally you will identify that the bus is not in its well situation, well condition. It is to some extent being broken and to some extent on the verge of destroying itself. And the tarpaulin has been flapping and these are buttoned down. Literally what happens, that when the buttoned down orientation has been considered, so you can identify that these are actually reciprocating the human temperament. Probably it's buttoned down, that means there is no particular possibility of exposure. And when there is no particular possibility of exposure, it actually indicates the particular reference to isolation, and at the same time these are referring to a kind of self-imposed imprisonment, as it is buttoned down, you see. So literally on the perspective of the raiments or clothings, which are completely being buttoned down, you can identify that it can reciprocate the human temperament, the human action, and thus it is actually pointing towards a kind of imprisonment that is obviously self-imposed. And when there is the matter with the self-imposed imprisonment, it can point it out with a particular form of alienation. So now what happens, that as the poet is considering himself, the speaker is considering himself as a reporter, and he is trying to change the basic temperaments of these people, like the people from the Dhangar subsections of the society, you will find certainly that the people who are completely being bound by the thought of religiosity, okay, the kind of thought process that is going on regarding the faiths and something, the blind faith and so, you can identify that the buttoned down, this particular image, it is referring to their, to some extent, their self-imposed exile, self-imposed alienation, and some particular kind of references being incorporated. So therefore, it's been stated that the tarpaulin flaps is tarpaulin that is covering the bus, and when the bus is moving, the wind is coming from outside, and ultimately you can find that with a particular reference to the air, there is the flapping sound of the tarpaulin can be heard, okay? Because you cannot see everything outside because it is completely covered. So when the visible perspectives are completely being missing, then you will find that the auditory level is in work. So therefore it says the tarpaulin flaps are there. The tarpaulin flaps are buttoned down on the windows of the state transport bus all the way up to Jejuri. It's covered. So the flapping sounds are there somehow in some places, but ultimately most of the sections of the tarpaulin has been, it is buttoned down on the windows. Each and every windows have been pointed out there. A cold wind keeps whipping and slapping. So these are some terms that you can identify. The whipping and slapping, these are the terms that can provide you some uncomfortable orientation that have been pointed out. So generally what happens, the whipping and slapping, obviously these are some onomatopoeic sounds that actually create some sound effect. But at the same time, when somebody whips you, when somebody slaps you, you can feel the pain, okay? And here the outside world, that is referring to the cold wind, these are, justifiably representing as something that is whipping and slapping you. Okay, literally it is slapping. What's saying actually? The cold wind keeps whipping and slapping a corner of the tarpaulin at your elbow. So as if just think that you were just sitting on the window seat, and now you can identify that the tarpaulin has been covered and it is buttoned down on the window that beside which you are sitting at this moment. And a particular section from a particular gap, the cold wind is coming inside. And the sound was just like the whipping and slapping because it is cold outside, and each and every touch of this cold air, it is actually providing you the whipping and slapping. Okay, so that's why you will find somehow that to some extent, though you were attaining a kind of a cozy atmosphere inside, but at the same time you cannot negate the outside world. You cannot negate the outside problems, different kinds of problems. And with the reference to the terms like whipping and slapping, they are to some extent making you to remember all these that is going on outside. So you cannot say that, okay, I am now sitting in a cozy atmosphere, I am just sitting in a cozy life leading, but at the same time you cannot negate the outside world because it is whipping and slapping you each and every moment. You look down the roaring road. Okay, the terms that have been pointed out, the wind is whipping, the wind is slapping, the road is roaring. So each and every time you will find a kind of personification has been oriented. Okay, the inanimate objects like, or maybe the wind, or maybe the road, and it seems to be the sound has been coming. Okay, so fundamentally you see that as it is completely being covered, so you cannot see you cannot observe the outside world through the windows, and it is dark obviously, but you can just listen to the sound, when through the pitch road, okay, when the tire actually moves, it creates a kind of a sound, you see, that in a long running buses or something, the transport, just because of the friction between the tire and the road, a kind of a sound has been created. It's continuous, obviously, and it seems to be roaring to some extent. So when the winds are whipping and slapping and the roads are roaring, so ultimately they are to some extent trying to teach you something, trying to refer to something, obviously. So that's why it's been stated that you look down the roaring road, you search the signs of daybreak. It's needed, you see. It is the sign of life. Okay, so ultimately it's been pointed out that when you are completely being in a claustrophobic world, being represented by such a kind of a description, and the daybreak would certainly refer to a kind of a stop, and when you can come out of the bus, okay, when the light will spill out, obviously. So generally it has been pointed out that daybreak, or the particular reference to the spilling of the light that's coming out from the bus, these are indicating that somehow, okay, when the daybreak will come, and certainly the journey, there will be a kind of a break in the particular continuous formation of journey, and you will get some provision to come outside. And when you will come outside, certainly you will find the sign of life. Okay, so it is not the sunlight, but the sign of life is being pointed out here. So you look down the roaring road, you search for signs of daybreak in what little light spills out of the bus. So if there is any particular light is coming from the small gaps and small holes of this tarpaulin, the small holes that are there. Your own divided face in a pair of glasses on an old man's nose is all the countryside you get to see. So that is very ironic, obviously. I must refer to that. You see what is happening there. Your own divided face in a pair of glasses. What happens there? You could see at this very moment in front of you, just in front of you, there is a person who is sitting. Okay? And the person was wearing glasses. The specs are there, you see. So ultimately what is happening there, that just at the glass, if you look at the glass, then you will find that your own reflection can be made visible. It is visible actually. So that's why in an ironic way it is being stated, just you were just sitting beside a window, now you're on a window seat. But as it is completely being covered up, so you cannot see, you cannot envision, you cannot just observe the outside world or the countryside. Rather, you could see, you can identify that in front of you there is a divided face in a pair of glasses. Your face has been broken into two, and these have been reflected from the two glasses of this person. The pair of glasses is there. An old man's nose of somehow, this is obviously very symbolic and significant. You can identify that what you are trying to attain and what you are trying to, what you are attaining actually. So what was your wish and what is actually happening there? All these two are being pointed out. It has been stated that you wanted to look at the countryside, you are trying to gather the countryside, the each and every kind of detail, the beauty, the natural beauty that is outside. But in place of that, you are finding yourself there, and that was also from the the pair of glasses on an old man's nose. And your fragmentation is always being pointed out here. So that's why that the old man, who is nothing but a kind of a fellow traveler, obviously. And as I've already mentioned, that this person is actually referring to some extent, one of the Dhangar religion or Dhangar subsections of the religion. The person who has been referred to here, the person is literally pointed out as a person who is, belonging to that particular group who had the faith. It is unlike the poet. So therefore, it's a kind of an alienation is being oriented. And when the face has been completely divided, when the image has been completely divided, it is also indicating some kind of, the division of the self. And at the same time, it is also pointing out or pointing towards the kind of fragmentation. So you see the alienation, the fragmentation, the contrast, the kind of division of the self. And each and every moment, the irony is always there. So literally, you will identify that the poet, what he had always tried to prefigure, what he had always tried to find, in the place of that, he could find that somehow the world, there are two worlds. The first world was belonging to the poet, and the second world is belonging to those personages who are there, okay, who are, committing the journey and who are the pilgrims. Unlike those personages, the poet is thinking in a different way. The poet is thinking in a different way, in a different tone. But at the same time, the kind of alienation is there. The poet cannot prefigure himself to be as a part of that particular bus or the part of this particular pilgrims and so. Therefore, the alienation is there, and ultimately he could identify himself as being fragmented. He cannot find anything that he was always trying after. So ultimately, these are the hints. The typical formation of fragmentation, the division of the cells, everything has been pointing towards the kind of, the failure that will be obviously coming at the end of this particular poem, or the end section of this particular poem. So that's why the first four stanzas, these are very significant in description, in the patterns with the description of this particular journey, and how this will be attended. Okay, this will be discussed in our next class. Okay.